Alright then gang, so the first major step in this game is to get input from the user, and by that I mean we need to allow the user to type a word on their keyboard and we need to track what that word is so that when they submit their guess word we can properly check it against the solution. So we need a way to track what a user is typing, right? And to do that we'll be adding a keyup event listener to the window object, which will then fire a function whenever there's a keyup event in the browser, and that function will get access to whatever key the user pressed. Now the function we want to fire whenever we have that keyup event is going to be the handle keyup function inside the use Wordle hook, but we won't be setting up the event listener inside this hook. Instead we're going to make a new Wordle React component which is going to set up that event listener, and inside that component we'll also call this use Wordle hook to get access to the handler function, and then we can call it whenever a keyup event occurs. So to begin with, I want to make a new React component, and I'm going to do that inside a new folder called components. So any extra components that we make for the application are going to sit inside this folder. Now the name of the component is going to be Wordle.js, and pretty much the entire UI of the game is going to live inside this component or nested components within it. So let's flesh it out a bit by typing RFC, which stands for React Functional Component, and then hitting tab. And by the way, I can do that because I've got a package installed called React Snippets for VS Code. It's this one right here. So install that if you want access to the shortcut. Anyway, inside the component, I'm going to accept in as a prop the solution. So I'll destructure that directly in the parentheses up here. And remember, that solution is the thing that we get inside the app component. So while we're in the app component, let's also output the Wordle component inside it. So at the top, first of all, we import Wordle from, and it's going to be from /components and then /Wordle. And then down in the template we can output it instead of just outputting the solution right here. But we only want to output it once we have a solution, because to begin with, for a split second before the fetch is complete, we don't have a solution. So we can say curly braces solution and then double ampersand, and then we're going to output the Wordle components. And basically what this means is only output the Wordle components when we have a value for this thing on the left, the solution. Also, we want to pass the solution in as a prop to the Wordle component as well. So make a prop called solution and pass in the solution as the value. Alright, so now we've done that, we can head back to the Wordle component, and we want to basically use this function right here, handle keyup, inside this component, because we're going to attach an event listener to the window object in here, so that every time we have a keyup event we fire this keyup function right here. So we need to grab this function from this hook, and also we need to grab the current guess value as well, because we'll be using that inside this Wordle component later as well. So let's invoke the hook and grab both of those values. So I'm going to say const current guess and also handle keyup. Those were the two things we needed from this hook, and we set that equal to use Wordle. I'm going to click on that to auto import it up here. Then we need to invoke this, and remember it accepts as an argument a solution word. So we need to pass that in, and we have access to the solution word right here. So let me copy and paste that like so. Okay, so we have access to these two things now. The next thing I want to do is use a use effect hook so that I can fire a function when the component first loads. Make sure that's imported at the top as well. And this function is going to attach an event listener to the window object. So we'll say window.add event listener, and the event is going to be a keyup event. So basically, every time a user presses a key on the keyboard and then releases it, it's going to fire this event listener function. And that function is going to be the handle keyup function that we grabbed right here. So we're going to fire this function right here every time a user types a letter, basically. Okay. Now we also need to return a cleanup function to unattach that event so that we don't add multiple events one after the other. So I'm going to say window and then it's remove event listener like so, and this time we want to remove from the keyup event the handle key-up function. So that detaches the event listener, and that is going to prevent us from having loads of different key-up event listeners every time this use effect function runs, because every time it does that, before it does it, it's going to run the cleanup function first to remove the current event listener and then attach it again. Okay, so now we have this event listener set up. Also, we need to pass through as a dependency, as a second argument inside use effect, the handle key-up function, because this is a dependency. We use it right here. So let me paste it in there. Okay, so we're now calling this function right here every time a user is going to type a letter. So what we can do is go over to that function, and then we take in the event object, right? That's standard. When we fire an event handler function, we get access to the event object, but we don't need the whole event object. We just need a property called key on the event object. So we could just destructure it directly from here if we prefer. So I could say key like so, and that will be the key that they press. And all I'm going to do is log it to the console. So console.log key like so. So let me press save now, and we're going to preview this in the browser. Alright, and it appears we've got an error. So it says cannot find file wordle.js. Okay, so let me have a little look. And yep, in the app component, we reference it with a lowercase w. It should be uppercase. So my mistake. Let's save this again and preview again. Alright then, so in the browser, if I start to type something like ninja, then I can see every time I press a letter, I get it logged to the console. Awesome. So this event listener is working, and it's all set up. Now all we need to do is listen for what letter a user is pressing and then add it to the current guess state. But we need to be careful, because look at this. If I press the shift button, then I can see we get shift down here. If I press the delete button, we can see I get deletes or backspace or enter or space. And we don't want to add those characters. We only want to add these individual letter characters, right? So we need to watch out for that. Alright, so now we want to conditionally update the current guess based on what a user is typing on the keyboard. And I say conditionally because we only want to add letters to the current guess, and this function fires no matter what key that you press. So if the user hits the shift key, we don't want to add the shift key to the current guess. That makes no sense. So we need to check what a user types to make sure it's a letter before we update the current guess state. And to do that, we'll be using a bit of regex. So with regex, we can test a string against certain patterns, if you like. In essence, that means that we can check that the key value is a single character, which is A to Z. So let's do an if check, first of all, to implement this. And then inside parentheses, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write out the regex first, which is going to be between 2 forward slashes. That's how we create regex. Oh, and by the way, if you want to learn more about regular expressions, I've got a whole series about them, which I'm going to leave the link to down below the video. But anyway, inside the slashes, I'm going to start with a caret, which means start checking from the start of the string that we're testing. Then I'll do square brackets, which allows us to match against a range of characters, and the range that we want to match against is A to Z lowercase and A to Z uppercase. And then finally, we need a $sign at the end to say stop checking at the end of the string that we're testing. Alright, so that's pretty much it. That's the regex pattern that will match against any single letter character A to Z. Now we need to test our key value against it, the key that the user pressed. So to do that, we can use a method on this regular expression directly called test. And then all we need to do is pass through the key as an argument. And this is going to test our key against this regex pattern to see if it matches. If it does match, if a user typed a letter key, then we get a true value. It passes. But if it doesn't match, if they type something like shift or a number, then we get a false value. So now this if block is only going to execute if a user types a letter key and nothing else, which is what we wanted. One other check that we need to do is to make sure that the length of the current guess is currently less than 5 characters long as well, because the max length of a guess should be 5 characters, right? And if we keep on typing letters after we have a word of 5 characters long, we shouldn't keep adding them to the current guess states. So it can't be 20 characters long or something like that. So let's now do another if check to say current guess must be less than 5, right? Because we only want to add a new letter to it if it's less than 5, because 5 is the maximum length of the word, right? And only if this passes then should we update the current guess state to add that new letter to it. So let's do that now. We need to use the set current guess function to update the current guess state. And remember, we defined that state back in the last lesson up at the top of the hook. So when we update the current guess, it's going to take the current value of the current guess and just add one more letter to it, the value of the key that we pressed. So it's going to depend on the previous state, right? And when that's the case, we pass a function to the set function right here to update it, because this function gets access to the most recent reliable state value for whatever we're updating. In our case, the current guess as an argument. So we can take that argument and then use it inside this function to return an updated value for the state based on the previous one. So what we want to do is just return the previous value concatenated with the key that a user just pressed. And that just adds the key onto the end of the string, right? And we're returning that. So this now becomes the new state value for the current guess. And that's pretty much all we need to do to keep track of the guess as the user types. Now, just quickly, what I'm going to do is output the current guess inside the template of the Wordle component. And we can do that because we extracted that value from the use Wordle hook right here. So I'll just say current guess and then a dash, and then I'm going to output the current guess value in curly braces so that as we type in a minute, we can see the current guess being tracked and being output on the screen. Alright, so in a browser now, if I start to type a word, we can see in the browser that word is output right here. So we're successfully tracking that word. And if I try to type more letters now, after 5 characters, then it won't let me. So 5 is the maximum length of the word I can enter, which is good. There is one problem though. I can't delete letters. So if I change my mind about a letter, I can't go back and correct it. So we need to add in that functionality as well to allow the user to delete a letter. So then back inside the handle key up function, we need to do another if check right here above the one we just created. And this if check is going to check whether the key is triple equal to backspace, and make sure this is a capital B that you use right here. So the backspace is the key when we want to delete a letter basically. And if that's the case, what we want to do is update the current guess again. So we need to use this function again. So let me copy that and paste it right here. And to update this, we're going to pass in a function again. And the reason we're doing this is because we need that previous state value, because we want to take that and basically just remove the most recent letter from it. So the way we can do that is by returning a new value that we want the state to be. And that value is the prev state, so the word we currently have, and then we use the slice method, and we're going to pass in 2 arguments, 0 and -1. And what this essentially does is return a new string to us based on the old string that essentially just removes the last character, which is what this -1 thing means right here, the last character. So that's going to remove the last one for us. And also after we've done this, we can just return right here so that it doesn't go any further into the function, because we don't then need to check this stuff right here. We know we've hit backspace. We don't need to do this if check, so we can return and then just wait for the next key up event. Okay, so let's save this now and see if it works. So in a browser, if I start to type a word, we can see it right there on the screen, which is still working. Awesome. I also can't add any more, which is good news. But now if I hit the backspace button, we can see the last letter is being taken away. All right. So this is all working now. We're now successfully tracking the user's input, the current guess, if you like. And the next step is to allow the user to submit a guess. And they're going to do that by hitting enter. So we're going to handle that in the next lesson.